this is Anne. Welcome back to Painting Big. We are here this month to talk some more about color theory. I wanted to tackle this one before I shoved myself into complementary color schemes and triadic color schemes and all these other color schemes you can play with, because from the first, we have to figure out how to reframe how we think about some of this stuff when we use the color wheel. Two caveats for you. One, this is the way that I do it. Lots of other people have lots of different ways to explain color. There's tons of color systems out there, and you may find one that makes more sense to you than this. So by all means, go and explore. However, this is the one that I've come up with kind of down through many years. I've been teaching color theory for about 2 decades now. And when I started it, I was talking to my mom, who's also an artist, and she's just like, that's a very difficult subject to teach. And it made an impression on me. And so from that point forward, I made an effort to figure out, when I make color decisions, why am I making those decisions, right? I kind of tried to break down everything that I could do. So this is my way to do it, and hopefully at least it'll help you out a little bit. Second caveat, this is very largely, and actually all of my videos on this channel are very largely geared toward 28mm Dungeons & Dragons type gaming model. It's not that the things I'm going to be talking about aren't applicable to things like busts or big action figure type models. They are, but you can get away with a little bit more when you have a bigger canvas sometimes. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's jump in. Alrighty, let's talk about colors. So, we tend to have very simplified versions of colors in our heads from the time we're kids, right? And the color wheel, which is a tool that we use to talk about color, and I used to kind of just throw it over my shoulder when I started a color theory class, but I have come to the conclusion that it is somewhat useful. But the color wheel kind of reinforces that, right? It's got these bright primary, secondary colors, tertiaries. They're all very intense. They're what we call saturated. And there's not really a muted color in the bunch, right? So we tend to think about red as being this. However, if we turn the color wheel over, we see that actually things are a little more complicated than that. Over here we have tints and tones and shades. And tints are when you add white to a color, tones are when you add gray, and shades are when you add black. So what this is trying to tell us, and a lot of people just ignore this part because they're like, what use is that? But what this is trying to tell us is that it isn't just that this is red. This is also red. This is also red. When you're dealing with color schemes, think like this. Because otherwise you get into the trap that I've seen so many beginning painters get into, where it's always, well, I'm using red and blue, so I'm using red and blue. And not, I'm using red and blue. Or red and blue. Or red and blue. Right? Now, just doing that, you can see suddenly, wow, boom, that totally blows up your color schemes, right? How many different color schemes can you put together just from red and blue? This is just the beginning. I didn't even whip out some of my crazier colors. But hopefully this gives you an idea, right? So it's not just that you have to pick the most saturated version of any color. It's that all of these things are all of these things are red. All of these things are blue, right? And so when you start combining them, that's when you get those interesting color schemes. That's when you look back at the first video I did on this and you're like, well, how do I know what goes together? Remember, muted colors go together? What did I just do there? I put my saturated colors together, and then I put my more muted colors together, right? So here we go. Let's get some of these in. So those are muted. This is a pretty intense muted color, but nonetheless it's muted by adding white, right? Just like we saw on the back of the color wheel. Whenever you add something, you take it away from this vibrant, fully saturated state, and you end up at something different. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about oranges. There's a trouble with oranges here. All right, so we all think about orange. Orange is orange, right? By the way, my husband fights with me about this. so you can all take David's word for it if you want. But this is just the way that I got used to thinking about it, because it was just easier that way. So orange is orange, right? And I tell people when I start out teaching color theory, I usually do it as kind of an aside, that brown equals orange. And they're like, most browns are muted oranges. I'm going to bring some black in here so that we can see it a little better. Yeah. And people are like, huh? Okay, no, really, brown is a muted orange. See that brown? There you go. I can make it a little bit lighter if you'd like. Make it a little bit of a nicer brown. And just to make sure it shows up on camera, I'll add a little bit of white to it so you can see that it is very firmly brown. There you are. There's your brown. Look at that. So, if you take it far enough, and I'll keep red, orange, and regular orange kind of next to each other here. If you add the black, you get brown. So that is what I mean when I say that most browns are muted oranges. Some of them go a little bit more toward red. Some of them go a little bit more toward yellow. They're still typically an orangey red or an orangey yellow. So that's number one. The other weird use of oranges. What's a skin tone? Guess what? Skin tones tend to be brown, right? Yeah, skin tones count as orange. What? What? You say? No way, Anne. No way. Oh, wait. What's that? Golly, it's a skin tone, isn't it? So when you are dealing, and most of the time, okay, let's just a word aside here for neutral tones. When you wash out that bright orange color, it does tend to go more toward a neutral, right? Which is why we usually don't have to worry about what color our skin tone actually is on a model. It tends to just harmonize with things. We're used to seeing our various skin tones from light to dark paired with various colors. So, it just kind of looks natural to us. Nonetheless, it is technically that you're throwing an orange in there. Now, if you didn't want it to really, if you didn't want to have to worry about that, you could also do what most artists do, and that is to add a tiny bit of some other color to that orange if you want to make it more of a skin tone that's natural, right? Because if you look at my skin tone, it's much more brown, right? It's not as vibrant as that. So a lot of times artists will mix the skin tone by doing the orange and white, but then they'll add a tiny touch of blue, a tiny touch of green, a tiny touch of brown, thus giving a little bit of black in there, but a minimal amount of black in there, right? If you add too much black to your light skin tone, what happens is your white and your black mix together into a gray, and your skin tone goes kind of gray. So if you're trying to do like alien or undead things, that can work. But if you're trying a normal human skin tone, keep your black to a minimum. Let's see here. See how that went gray right there? That's because of all the white in that skin tone and the black. So let me rinse out my brush before I even try to play that. And I can kind of go, yeah. So that's more, but the black really hits it hard, so you have to be careful. But that's going to give us more of a natural skin tone, maybe. So yeah, kind of like, yeah, there you go. So now you can see it's going more brown. See that shift where it's really, really bright, almost cartoon here, and now it's a much more natural color? Yeah. But you have to be real cautious if you're using black. So I recommend use a brown, use a blue green. So anyway, hopefully I've gotten my point across here about brown and skin tones equal orange. All right, so with that in mind, we are now going to talk about our first color relationship thing. I'm going to take this right out of here. And let's look at some pretty models. Okay, so the first color relationship we're going to talk about is, and I'm going to hide part of this model because she is not safe for work, but we're going to talk about complementaries. So complementary colors on the color wheel, you see this big strong arrow here? Complementary colors are colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. So if we move our arrow to red, the color directly across from it is green. Likewise with yellow and purple and blue and orange, right? There's orange, there's blue. So let's talk about complementary color schemes. They're definitely a thing. Often you'll see them paired with a bit of an accent color so that they're not super boring. This is a purple and yellow. So notice that I am using a brown, so technically there's an orange in there. It's a warm and it's kind of a neutral brown, so it does tend to disappear being a neutral. Likewise, my cream color here, also based off of an orange, right? So I'm using neutral colors in here. I've got my purple, I've got my embroidery, and my accent color is actually a teal. Let's get close on this one. So you can see my teal. It's very little. You can see my cool Damascus dagger that I did. And all of the embroidery here is gold. And of course, I've also got a gold on the dagger. One second while I turn it over for you, and then you can really see. purple, and gold. So on the back of the model, that's pretty much all there is. So this is one of my favorite color schemes, and this is one of my favorite models. This is the model I entered in my first and only crystal brush competition, because they ended it the year after I first entered. I got first cut. I made first cut, but I did not actually win a trophy. Sadly, I will never be able to compete with my husband on that. You can see I've also brought the purple in on her eyes and her lips, making it a main player, and then the gold is repeated various places. So that is purple and gold, or purple and yellow. Now, that actually does bring up something, right? Guess what? Gold counts as yellow. So does blonde hair. So think about that, right? What's blonde hair? It's a pale yellowish hair color. So even though it's muted, it can still count as a yellow. And gold is, it's a yellow gold. So it also is going to count as yellow. So the dagger here counts with the same as the embroidery. Okay, examples number next. Let's talk about, this is why I brought up, we're gonna show one of my husband's models off. He's awesome, and this is his best in show model from ReaperCon. He did her, it's a Mark Maskelyns bust, and based on his girlfriend, I think. And David did her as a Taylor Swift fan. This is a brown and blue model. Can you see? Now that you know what you know about browns and about skin tones and stuff, the only really strong color predominant on this model is the blue from the denim. The hair is brown, though it has a lot of golden highlights in when it gets up here in the light. The beer bottle is definitely an orangey brown. She's got some accent colors because he's used the Eras concert t-shirt, right? So he's got red and purple. He's got some other colors in here, but they're so small and they're really not the focal point of the model, so they really just count as accents. The skin tone is definitely an orange. You can even see a really intense orange in the shadows here, and even here on the arm. David hand mixes all his skin tones from primary colors, so that's where you end up with that. You can also see the back of the arm here. Really strong reddish orange, huh? So all that is just reflected light from the spot that's presumably hitting her right there. So when I break this down, I have to say it's a blue and orange color scheme. Even though it's blue and brown, still counts as orange. So if that's why it works. Browns and blues work great together for that reason. Let's take a look at another one that's very similar. I actually had a couple in this particular thing. And it's also a very simple model, but it's inverted. This is my Borka bust that I took a Privateer Press Grandmaster with at Adepticon a couple years ago. And with him, we've got the opposite thing. Again, the strong color is blue, but this time it's the skin tone, and everything else is the orange. Everything else is brown. So from the creamy beige brown color of the fur to the more intense brown, which definitely comes up to an orangey color in the highlights here, and even to the rust and discoloration on the metals. This is true metallics, by the way. So all of that, all those browns, I even snuck in, I think, a little bit of more of an orange color back in places on the rust. And we've got an accent color. Let's get closer. Which is the magenta, right? But it's very small, and it's also pretty saturated. I kept it explicitly around the mouth and eyes so that it draws attention to his face. Everything else is neutral, right? The gray stone here is neutral, and the beige is mostly neutral. Technically, you could say that the beige is a little more yellowy orange because it's more of a golden color, just like our Swifty's hair was. So there are other colors in play, but the main colors here are blue and brown. And that's what you're gonna, when you hear complementary color scheme, that's something you should keep in mind. It doesn't mean that everything on the model is just blue or orange. You know, it doesn't mean everything. It just means that's the predominant color scheme. Any other color is just an accent, which in this case would be the pink magenta. So got that? All right, let's look at the only red and green one that I actually have. It's a work in progress of mine. All right, so the only red and green one that I've got, and it's only in the starting stages, so you'll have to use a lot of imagination. This is an orc bust from Black Sun Miniatures, Orc Rager. So he's a huge monster. You can see how big he is next to my fingers. He is going to be a green and red color scheme. Some of his armor and leather down here, I'm going to go a lot, fairly intense red, but probably not, I'm going to go probably around here. And maybe spots of it will get a little brighter, but nothing that really pops like this, right? Because remember, muted colors, so more muted colors. Now, I will kind of give you guys a caveat here. When you're working with muted colors, you can pop up some saturation in places. Like, I could make his lip more saturated. It's like Borka here. He's all kind of, grayed out, browned out, very muted, but the magenta is bright. But you can do that because it's small. So with accent colors, as I told you, I think on that other video, you can pop them up in saturation with a muted color scheme. So Mr. Orc here is, I'm going to intensify the pink here and make it a little bit more punchy, because right now it's a little too dim. And then the olive green on his skin will continue to develop. And this is comic book style, so you can see that we've got actual cross-hatching and more like ink, kind of strokes, and black in the shadows. This is the only time I would ever do like black in my shadows, actually. Otherwise, I'm not a big fan. But you can see that I'm bringing actual lines in as if I had pen and ink to this model. So this is kind of a fun thing to do, but it does take a lot of brain power for me, because that's not anything I've done before. So that's why he's a work in progress right now. So, all right, so this is a red and green, right? Just like I said, you don't have to have, you can have this be red, you can have that be red. So this won't look like Christmas. It's an example of a red and green color scheme that is not going to look like Christmas when it's done. And I have a lot of people, or in the past at Paint Club at Reaper, I had a lot of people ask me, well, how do I do red and green then? Because it always looks like Christmas. But this is it. This is why. Because your red doesn't have to be primary color red. Your green doesn't have to be primary color green. You can use an olive green. You can use a gray green. You can use a really dark green. You can use any of these greens, and the same with the reds. So once you start doing that, once you go away from those primary red and green, it doesn't so much look like Christmas anymore. If I paint a model in like a dark foresty green with blue shadows and then I put a pink in it, it's not going to look like Christmas, right? So that's kind of the way to think about complementary color schemes. Always keep in mind your options are a lot broader than you think they are, and if you're not real comfortable going with something other than what looks like a fairly primary blue or red, just remember that if you want to go a little bit off that path, just remember that the other colors need to be a little muted too. So if you're going with a dark red like this dragon red, maybe you go with a blue-gray, right? Just a little bit. This is still a pretty decent blue, but it's just a little grayed out, right? And these colors will work together. So, okay, next time we are going to talk about triadic color schemes. That's going to be our next video. So it's a different way. Instead of a complementary color scheme, you can do a triad: red, yellow, blue, or green, orange, purple. And I'll be back with that to show you some examples and talk about all the different triads that you can do. All right, remember, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/paintingbig, all one word, painting big. And I will be doing a PDF on this one for the $2 tier. You can also just sign up for my free level, and that'll just send you a note when I put up a new one of these videos, and you'll get to watch it early before I pop it up on the YouTube. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks so much. I hope you're going to enjoy this color theory series. It's kind of my thing, so I thought I'd better do a series on it. All right, thank you. And this is Anne signing off.